Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Look Up, the news and current affairs program from Compass Media. Every week, myself and Bar Markey and my co-host Padraig O'Mraney look at news stories that maybe haven't got into the mainstream media, or on the other hand, maybe haven't had a fair hearing in the mainstream media. Thanks for joining us today, Padraig.
No problem, Finbar. Happy to join you. Plenty in the news as ever.
Yeah, and you know something, most of it is negative. It's almost impossible to find a positive story. And the world seems to be on a cascade into negativity and into war into the future at a global level, into economic collapse. So many different problems happening and showing their heads really this week, especially when it comes to the banking system and things like that. We're going to open up this week, if you don't mind, Padraig, with a story from the United States and a statement during an interview. I think it was on the Jimmy Dore show by Robert Kennedy Jr. And he's talking about the not really just the origins of the COVID virus, but the entire program in which viruses are manipulated and are changed for what he describes as bioweapons programs. And he claims that Dr. Fauci, who was the lead in the coronavirus response in the United States, how Dr. Fauci is right in the middle of all that. We'll have a look at this video and we'll come back to you in a little minute.
The Pentagon was very worried about actually launching a full-blown bioweapons arms race because they said nobody, this is very sketchy. The Patriot Act, exemptions are very sketchy and people don't even know about it. And so they didn't want to do it. So they took the money that Cheney gave them, $2.2 billion, and they funneled it through NIH. And it all went through Anthony Fauci. So beginning in 2002, Anthony Fauci got a 68% raise from the Pentagon for doing bioweapons development.
Wow.
And he got a raise of billions of dollars a year to do it. And then he started that's when they started doing all this gain of function. And then in 2014, 3 of those bugs escaped in high profile escapes from different labs in the United States. Fauci built all these new labs at BU, at Galveston to do his shenanigans. And so 3 of the bugs escaped, and they received publicity. They had smallpox and a lot of really bad things. And then Congress held hearings on it. Everybody was angry. These bugs escaped, and 300 scientists, top scientists, sent letters to Obama saying, you got to shut down Anthony Fauci because he's going to create a pandemic. And so Obama ordered a moratorium. And at that time, Fauci had 18 different gain of function experiments he was doing around the United States. But Obama ordered him to shut them all down, but he didn't. He instead moved his stuff offshore to Wuhan, where he could do it out of sight of these 300 scientists and nosy White House officials who were trying to shut him down. And they continued to do it with Ralph Baric, the same people he was funding here, Ralph Baric,
Wow.
and Peter Daszak, and they moved their operations to the Wuhan lab.
That was Robert Kennedy Jr. outlining what a lot of people think they already knew. But when it comes from such a high profile person, a person who's been involved in both politics and law all his life, those facts, although we ourselves at Compass Media have 100% proof, it's strange the days when things like that are being said by such high profile people. What do you think about that, Padraig?
It's interesting information, Finbar. I mean, I think Robert Kennedy will probably be seen by half the world as a truth speaker, and maybe the other half as a head kind of figure in the anti-vax movement. That's probably the way he's seen by some people. But the content of what we're talking about, that's what we should focus on, regardless of anybody's pre kind of views or conceptions of what people represent. These labs, we do actually know that some of the research was intended to identify future mutations of viruses, and that could have been potentially in the form of bioweapons. So like these are things that maybe people don't talk about, but they are some of the reasons why they have these labs. So it doesn't shock me at all to hear this kind of come out in terms that are putting them forward as facts.
And then we have reports of labs being found in Ukraine, US biolabs been found in Ukraine as well. And Victoria Nuland, who is one of the major players in US foreign relations, she actually admitted to it on a very highly publicized video last year, in which she admitted that the US had biolabs. I think she regretted that admission severely, but she did admit it. So it's not just labs that were in China, labs that were moved when the Obama administration, we're told temporarily, but irrespective of for how long, had they outlined that kind of research. We're going to keep focused on this story because it is pretty important. It's not just about what happened in the past, it's what's happening now and what's happening into the future as well. Staying in international news, we're moving to Israel now. And there seems to almost be a new Nakba, a new expulsion and persecution, if not genocide, being committed against the Palestinian people by this new extremist Zionist Israeli government that are in place, with the Netanyahu government on the one hand party, and these radical extremist Zionists being led by Ben Gvir as well in that coalition, and leading the Ministry of Police and all of those important roles. This extreme Zionist and this party have those roles and are controlling them. We've got a few bits of footage now, but this footage needs to be magnified out in so many instances. It's just 2 instances of continued expansion of settler programs in Israel, and massive expansions and expectations from those expansion programs, which means the eviction of Palestinian families that have been on that land for hundreds of years. They're being moved off that land now, and they're being put into essentially into camps, very similar to what happened in the late 1940s and the 1950s with the Israeli original expansion and what became known as the Nakba. We'll have a look at these 2 videos. We'll come back to you in a minute. So that first video was of orchard in a Palestinian orchard, that olive orchard that was cut down by settlers as a part of this settler program, an orchard that was probably used for hundreds of years to grow olives and has been cut down, has been the source of income for that family and maybe for other people in that local village. The second video we showed was a family who've just been made homeless by these settler programs as well. Their home has been demolished, their land has been taken over. We may see Israel a summer that's nice and sunny, but that family are out in the cold and the rain at the moment. And that needs to be multiplied by thousands and thousands of instances in what looks like a growing genocide, to the extent that the High Commissioner of Foreign Relations in the EU, what I would call the Foreign Affairs Minister of the EU, Joseph Borrell, came out this week with an extremely strong statement condemning Israel for this expansionism, which is highly unusual and shows what extremes the Israeli government are going to at the moment. And in response, I understand that today or yesterday, the Israeli government have actually rebuked or refused an invitation to Borrell to come to Israel for some function. So he's not invited anymore, it would appear. What do you think of, and we cover it nearly every week, Patrick, and we ask this question every week, but what do you think about the idea that right now, as we speak, there is a genocide almost? And I don't mean that people are being massacred essentially, but I do mean that they're being moved officially. They're being moved in a planned way, an entire population against their will. And that is a form of genocide in itself that's recognized. What do you think that this is happening right now? Nobody's doing anything about it. With the chaos of the world, nobody cares, do they, Patrick?
It doesn't seem so, and we don't want to be repetitive, but I suppose somebody's got to keep this in the public eye. As difficult as it is to reach the public, it's of vital importance that these issues are brought up. And people start getting the concept of it, because the hypocrisy that we have to sit through and listen to every day when we're listening to issues in other parts of the world, regimes that our governments would like to get behind. Meanwhile, they're silent on what is like genocidal behavior against a people and a nation.
Yeah, we're going to keep an eye on this, because this story is not going away, and it's frightening, to be honest with you. I just think it's frightening. It's happening before the eyes of the world, and there's so many other things happening. People don't care. One of those things that's happening is moving over to East Asia and Southeast Asia, and military developments there, nuclear developments there, involving Australia and, once again, NATO, whatever the hell the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is doing in the Pacific, who knows? But the Australians are now involved in a new program called AUKUS, which involves the United States, Japan. Basically, it's a form of NATO down in the South Pacific, and they're gearing up for war with China. To make that very obvious, the language that's coming out of the Australian government and of some elements of Australian media is terrifying in terms of its determination to go to war with China into what appears to be the near enough future, the way they're talking. And we have a video here, which is quite disturbing, I thought. And it's public government advertising to get people to join the military in Australia. But the enemy that's been presented in this particular video is not China or the Russians, or it's actually their own population. Let's have a look at this video. So that was a video of an advertising or recruitment video from Australia, in which it appears that the soldiers have been trained to act against their own people in domestic situations. But on the other hand, we have Australia becoming the lead in the East in terms of trying to develop war with China. It's a bit confusing. Are they expecting that there's going to be demonstrations and protest against their plans for war with China? And so they're recruiting the army, and they'll be pretty honest in their advertising about what their intentions are. What do you make of that, Porter?
It does seem to me that there is a similarity in behaviours over a period of time with some of these governments like Australia, New Zealand, from times of COVID right through to now, when we're talking about what's going on in the world around wars. They seem to organise themselves very much in a way that's in synchronicity with the US agendas, and if it begs the question, is that who is actually behind some of the strategies that's being employed? It's frightening to think that that there would be some sort of association with NATO when it's so far away geographically. It seems like we're not very, very far from, the concept of a world army, where if we're geographically spread that far, it really does look like we're going down a bad route.
Yeah, we're just showing some headlines while you're talking there from CNN and other programs. Australia, the UK and US are joining forces in the Pacific, but will nuclear subs arrive quick enough to counter China? will nuclear subs arrive quick enough to counter China, as though China is some immediate threat in some way. Just the language is terrifying. It's so aggressive in nature, and it's so out of context and not a reality. China is determined to thwart AUKUS, driven by distrust and fear of a US nuclear buildup. So these headlines are just directing us towards war with China, as well as this war that we're aimed towards Russia at the moment. And it's all very, very terrifying, I think. Any final thoughts on that, Porter?
And just the flippant use of the word nuclear just keeps getting thrown in there. It's a conditioning really for people to get in support. It's a fear program really, like we've seen with other things. You can get people to fear, you get people to be afraid of things, they tend to be compliant, they'll throw their lot in with you, and public opinion will be deemed to have been in support of government actions. I think there's way too much power at government levels across the world and way too little democracy.
Yeah, I would agree with you once again. The military build-up isn't just over in the east. There have been military exercises in France, in a town called Frontenac. German, British, French, US military have had military exercises on the streets of a quite a large town. And to see this happening in Europe is, again, quite frightening. And it just shows that the entire world seems to be going mad and seems to be moving towards an inevitable war that there is no point in, that there's no need for. Have a look at this. So that was French, British, US, and German troops, amongst others, practicing war games in a French town. They actually had a naval assault on the town, all practice, of course, but a naval assault on the town, and then they took the town over. And this is happening in the EU in 2023. They believe that there's a need to have these exercises, and it just seems to ramp things up more and more and more. But we just have a look at some details about this Orion military exercise program that they're having in France. I'll just bring a picture up on that now. Orion military exercises, a fictitious war, but a real test for French troops. So this comes from the news agency France 24. Last week, France launched Orion 23, months-long military exercises involving thousands of troops, naval and land vehicles, aircraft and an aircraft carrier. The joint military exercises had been in the works since 2020, but as Western powers learned the lessons of the Ukraine war, Orion 23 grew bigger, more ambitious, multidimensional, and has drawn in France's main allies. It was barely 5 a.m. on a Sunday morning when the southern French town of Frontenac was flooded with troops as an amphibious military craft landed on its beaches, unleashing hundreds of soldiers and tons of heavy equipment. So we can see that this is really happening, and that Europe seems to be preparing for direct conflict with somebody, whoever that somebody is. Last week on our program, on a program earlier this week, I looked at the fact that the US chair of the Defense Committee, the UK chair of the Defense Committee, made a statement to the effect that the UK is in fact at war with Russia, and the sooner that they go into direct conflict with Russia, the better, as far as he is concerned. So military exercises in the EU on the streets of France. What do you think, Porter?
Again, like I say, it's a ramping up, and it's a level of preparedness for the population to accept these things as unavoidable. What's amazing really is, like, when we're looking across the world at the cost of living issues that we have in Europe, and fuel and energy issues, that the money that's been spent on preparations for war and actual war and support for aid in war and looking for actual military victories rather than looking for peace, we're in a serious time of flux, I think, like that we may not have been in for many decades.
And we are talking about trillions of dollars and or euros or whatever currency you want to talk about. I understand that when the UK and the United States and the EU produce weapons, they're far more expensive than similar equally quality weapons from places like Russia when Russia produces them. So there seems to be a lot of cream being taken off the top when it comes to the production of weapons, but literally trillions of dollars that could be put towards the hunger, towards unemployment, towards homelessness right around the world. Instead, it's going to war. But there does seem to be resistance building in Europe to the war. We have a video of a number of different demonstrations linked to militarization in one way or another. One such video is from Bilbao in Spain. We're going to look at it now, and it's an anti-NATO protest. We'll have a look at this and we'll come back to you. That was a demonstration from Bilbao in northern Spain against increased militarization across the EU and increased militarization in Spain and the increased presence of NATO in Spain as well. In the Czech Republic, there have also been protests, not just about war, but also about the country's continuing support for the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainian flag was put on top of the National Museum, and a crowd of demonstrators came to the museum and took the flag off. Here's a video of that. And in Georgia, we have seen protests over the last week that seem to have been organized by organizations that receive their funding from outside of Georgia, what we might call NGOs. But we haven't been shown protests over the last few days from Georgia that are condemning those NGOs and condemning what were actually riots that occurred last week about a draft law that was to require the registration of any organizations that received more than 20% of funding from outside of the country. The United States already has a law like that. The EU is in the process of introducing a law like that. But pro-EU agencies and organizations and agents within Georgia fomented riots last week to stop that there's a similar law been introduced to Georgia. Here's some protests of demonstrations there over the last few days. Okay, so there are protests that we've seen in Georgia. I know a lot of people watching might be a bit confused what's happening if they're not used to how international relations work when one empire wants to destabilize another empire and will collapse governments and allies of that empire to do that. Porter, what's your take on not only what's coming out of Georgia, but what's coming out of developing protests against the increased militarization of the world in general?
So I think, Finbar, it's really important for us to highlight and promote anti-war movements and give encouragement to people, but we also need to highlight to people that they need support and people need to get active themselves. They need to come out when rallies are called. If they truly oppose war, they need to come out in the streets. When we have them here, we need to get people out as well. And it's important to not think that things are growing and you don't have to do anything. That's just a point I'd like to make. In terms of the Georgian issue that's gone on there at the minute, it does look like destabilization techniques are right. Once again, it's something that it's hard to verify, but it's quite convenient, I would say, at this time to see that.
Yeah. Just in terms of demonstrations in Ireland, I believe that there's another demonstration on the 25th of this month, the 25th of March, in Dublin city centre, to try to encourage the Irish government to forcefully call for peace rather than go along with this narrative that Ukraine has to have absolute victory, or otherwise there will be no peace. Peace is needed, and that means listening to both sides. And there is a demonstration calling for that on the 25th in Dublin. Just finally on this, the Canadian sports minister, Minister St. she was asked questions in relation to why Russian and Belarusian sports people are being banned from international sports, and why she is one of the principal advocates of their being banned, and why she hasn't done it to other countries that have invaded independent and sovereign states in the past. We'll have a look at this.
Madame Saint-Ange, I have a question for you. You've said you don't want Belarusian and Russian athletes at the Olympics. Sorry, I'm just asking a question of the minister. She's the Minister of Sport. I'm asking, she doesn't want Russian or Belarusian athletes to participate in international Olympics or sporting events. But did you feel the same way after the U.S. invaded Iraq?
Okay, 20
How about Afghanistan? How about Canadian troops after we bombed? How about Canadian athletes after we bombed Libya or Afghanistan? Excuse me. Why won't you answer the question? It's a really simple question. Minister Saint-Ange, it's a really simple question. Why? How about Israeli athletes? Israel has a 50-year occupation, 50-year occupation of Palestinian lands, an apartheid state. How about banning Israeli athletes?
On a eu une discussion. Si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas. Vous avez mon numéro de téléphone.
Why can't you answer the question?
Non, si vous avez des questions,
no, excuse me.
Si vous avez des questions,
why can't you answer the question?
Si vous avez des
why won't you answer the question? Why won't you call for banning Israel?
So that was the Canadian Sports Minister, Saint-Jean, who certainly didn't want to answer questions and just walked away when she realized the nature of the question, because she has no answer, or at least any answer that she would give would be completely unconvincing. We're going to move on, Padraig. We're going to start focusing on a little bit of Irish news. You wanted to lead in the Irish section with the Burke family, who've been in the news in relation to the transgender issue in schools, and one of the Burke family refusing to address a pupil as they, and refusing to engage in the whole trans issue agenda. Do you want to lead with that one, Padraig?
Sure, Finbar. And I think, like, as we do try and make a point that we try and cover things that haven't been covered or not given a fair hearing. In terms of this has been very, very widely covered. So I'll just bring in a segment on it and then we can discuss it. So a brother of Enoch Burke is set to remain in prison, having again refused to accept bail a week after he was charged over outbursts in the Court of Appeal. Simeon Burke, 24, a barrister at law, King's Inn student, had been arrested following chaotic scenes where Gardaí had to intervene in the forecourts after a judgment was handed down in teacher Enoch Burke's case on the 7th of March. He and his family had been there to support his brother, awaiting a ruling on his unsuccessful appeal against the High Court orders refraining him from attending Wilson's Hospital School in County Westmeath. He had told the presiding district court judge that the Court of Appeal was trying to shove transgenderism down the throats of the people, and he demanded a halt to his prosecution. As a result, he was remanded in custody with consent to bail and has remained in prison for the past week. He faced his second hearing when appeared before Judge Cephas Power at Cloverhill District Court. So, Finbar, I suppose this is something that is being widely covered in the news, and it doesn't seem to be going away either. So what I would say is, my assessment of it is that there is a very principled, strong, ethical Christian moral fibre in this family, and then they seem to hold very dear to their religious views. And I think they kind of reach out for the Constitution to qualify their rights in doing so, in having religious beliefs and freedom of speech and stuff like that. I think where it's coming into conflict is where society is changing a degree, or is trying to change, and this is probably an issue that's bringing it to a head in the public eye. And it does seem that there doesn't be that many favourable articles given them, I think, a fair hearing. Really, like, it goes without saying that their position is one that is rigidly based on religion. I think we've all established that, and I think the opposing view is one that's based on probably on progressive social views and the changing times that we live in. And really the two seem to come together, and there doesn't seem to be a middle ground on this. It's like everything. There doesn't seem to be a middle ground, a conversation on it. You're either for them or against them. And one thing I would remark on is an awful lot of people who are for the Burke view wouldn't have been great Christians beforehand. They maybe are just looking at it in terms that it serves a purpose maybe for them, because I would liken the level of religious belief that I'm seeing coming from the Burke family as something similar to what you would see if Jehovah's Witnesses knocked on the door, and maybe really going through the end of world scenarios, and people don't really give them much time, but they seem to be giving a lot of time to this because maybe it's useful to progress along a view, you know, that is at loggerheads with society at the moment. So I'm not really giving my personal view on it, but I do think that there is, again, extremes, and there isn't a middle ground on this.
And isn't it, this particular case is about his engagement with an individual student and what that student wishes to be referred to as. I'm not sure, I can't at the top of my head conceptualize any particular instance in which I would be referring to a student to their face as he, she, or they. Anyway, I'd usually use their name or whatever the case might be. I don't know the details of the case enough, to be honest with you, to be able to talk about it from the point of view of there have been accusations about the behaviors of some of the members of the family in terms of how they behaved in the school and how they approach things, and that suggestions that was the key problematic as opposed to the belief itself. I am more versed on the wider issue of the concerns that some people have with regards to teaching trans issues and the level of sex education and the depth and the extent of planned changes in the sex education system at primary school level. And there have been statements made by Catholic school management representative bodies, the Irish Muslim Council, which, especially the Irish Muslim Council statement, went out of the way to not condemn trans people and to recognize them and to acknowledge them, but to say that maybe at a primary school age, children are too malleable to introduce issues like this, you know. So I don't think the Burke issue and this issue have immediate transposable core factors in them. One of them is about the treatment of one individual, whereas the bigger issue that I'd be a bit more versed in, to be honest with you, would be the issue or the disagreements on whether this should be taught in primary schools or not. So there is a much bigger issue than the Burkes themselves. Personally, I don't think religion and religious bodies and individuals are the only people that have concerns here. And yet it seems to be that in the area of concern, the religious are filling that vacuum. And yet there are people who are not religious who have concerns about this teaching at such a young age, and at least to try to have an input into the design of that teaching and an opt-out if possible as well. What's your thoughts on that, Patrick?
Yeah, I think so. I think we covered that last week in terms we said we would like to see more data coming into that conversation. Just on the specifics of the Burke cases here, where there's a couple of them now that are in trouble with the state and law terms, and they're highly qualified people and highly educated people. Some of them are in the law system themselves. I think the sister's a solicitor, and I think the younger brother here is a student of law. Well, what kind of occurs to you is it not farcical to be turning up at the school every day at this point when there is legal proceedings there? You know, originally when he was suspended from school, usually it's normal for an employee to accept leave of omission from work pending, you know, an investigation or whatever. That's all very normal, but they seem to have, they're not accepting any rulings or any other judgments, so they seem to be quite fundamentalist. I don't see mediation in this issue. Like, they seem to be prepared to go to prison, like, you know. Principles are great, Finbar, but at the same time, is this the best way to play out this issue? Is there a more compassionate way to deal with the issue? Like, I'm sure there is a school somewhere that he'd probably fit in, because the this would be the ethos right the way through, and there would be no changing them. But society is changing, and if people want to have different views, then they should be had. Like, the conversation should be had. It shouldn't be shut down in terms of absolute fundamentalism, as the way I see it at the minute, with what's going on there. So look, we hadn't spoken about it. I thought we were probably should have, because we try and cover issues that maybe weren't given all the different angles on it. It seems to be very polar, one or the other. So I think maybe we'll check back in on it going forward and see where has it got to.
Yeah. But at the same time, I think there's a bigger conversation to be had. We touched upon that last week, and I don't think the conversation should be enveloped purely by a religious perspective, that there are perspectives out there that are secular but may have concerns as well. Patrick, you wanted to also talk about the continuing housing issue in this country that just doesn't seem to be going away.
There's two sides to this story, Finbar. So what's been put out there by the government to Taoiseach, and then what is actually something that's on the ground. So I'm going to read both to you, okay? So Taoiseach Micheál Martin said that the state has turned a corner on housing, and that there will be no change to the tax treatment of the rental sector before the budget. Speaking to journalists in New York on Tuesday morning, where he's attending a series of events all week for St. Patrick's Day, Mr. Martin said that the cabinet had decided not to make any changes before the budget. The Irish Times previously reported that some ministers favour introducing tax breaks in the coming months for renters and landlords. There can't be a knee-jerk response to the situation, Mr. Martin said. Asked about the Irish Times story, Mr. Martin said collective cabinet responsibility is an imperative in all these things. Asked was he categorically ruling out any changes before the budget, Mr. Martin insisted that the state had turned a corner on activity in the housing sector. The other key point I would like to make, he said, is the figures in the last quarter of 22 and the first month of 23 in January indicate that we've turned a corner in respect of house building, and particularly in terms of the first home buyers in very significant numbers. All of that indicates that there's a significant activity in the housing market, and we have to build more faster, he said. Supply is the key to resolving the range of issues in relation to housing, because it is the number one priority. It's the number one issue facing people in the country in Ireland, and we've got to do everything possible to increase supply. Meanwhile, Rebel Green Party TD Nessa Hourigan said concrete proposals are needed from the government to ensure support from the backbenches on a Sinn Féin motion on ending the eviction ban. Mr. Martin said that Sinn Féin's motion was cynical and dishonest, and insisted that a homelessness crisis would have been made worse if the government maintained the ban. Mr. Martin said that the Sinn Féin motion would mean that evictions would resume days after Christmas. Let's not be taken in by Sinn Féin's dishonesty, he says. This is days after Christmas Day. Sinn Féin are saying that we would lift the ban. How credible is that? Asked about instances where tenants would refuse to leave properties because they've nowhere to go, Mr. Martin said, we've all dealt with cases in the past where we work with local authorities. We work with people who are selling, and we do seek extra time to get the issue resolved. That's not new. I don't mean overhauling, but I mean agreement that we will prevent, and it needs that hands-on engagement over the coming while to ensure that we prevent people from going homeless. But above all, it's about the long-term effectiveness of the rental market. We need more people to let out their homes. We need more people coming into the market, and we need to stop people exiting the market. So that's Micheál Martin's view, and it seems to be all based around the market being profitable, if you ask me. The other side of it then is just a short piece that was on Dublin Live online. So a distraught renter said the eviction ban saved her family from homelessness, but she doesn't know what she's going to do after being serviced a notice to quit. Sonia said that she'd been living in the house for 20 years with her mother, father and nephew, was frantically searching for alternative accommodation, but insisting that there was nothing. Speaking on RT's up front with Katie Hannon, she said, we've been in our house for the last 20 years. We got a notice to quit. The ban was our saving grace to find something, but it's not like we're not trying to find something, but we genuinely can't. So there's two sides to the story. Micheál Martin is putting it out there that we've turned a corner on housing, and a member of the public that is in a vulnerable tenancy is saying that we have not turned the corner, and that there isn't any supply for her to get somewhere else to live. It's remarkable, I think, really, like that you can put one thing out when the other is actually happening on the ground.
I think when I hear the likes of Micheál Martin, Leo Varadkar, others speaking on this issue, what I hear is blah, 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 because they just say the opposite of the facts. To suggest that a ban on evictions would increase homelessness is outrageous. It's just simply outrageous. And to say that to the people is to insult the people of this country, to state the obviously completely false with a straight face. But he's over in America talking. Of course, he's going to talk up their so-called successes, how they're going to go turning a corner. The reality is that if we continue with people coming into this country, 220,000 PPS numbers, national insurance numbers last year, they have to be housed. And there's no way, if we were to take every empty home in this country and magically do them up and have them ready to be occupied tomorrow, there's still going to be over 100,000 people in need of homes at least. Remember, statistics came out a few months ago that there were 300,000 hidden homeless people in Ireland, on top of the 11,000+ people that we consider to be officially homeless. The figures do not add up, and there's no amount that a continued building program where we're just building with concrete blocks and not looking at a plurality of types of builds, where we're not looking at hemp builds, when we're not looking at other type of building. That type of a solution with a reduction in the amount of people coming into the country is the only way that we're going to solve this problem, and this government is just not going to do it.
They're not going to do it because it's not their solution. Their solution is market based and profit driven, and anything else, it loads them to go there.
No. But even it's not just that, because there can be profit in modular housing, and modular housing can last a long time. During just after World War II, in the south of England, they built lots of houses along the coast, chalets as they call them, and they were expected just to be occupied for 10 years. They're still occupied today, and they make homes, happy homes for a lot of people in the south of England. So if we were to invest in the infrastructure to be able to produce modular homes, we could really change the mix and the type of homes that we're producing. It would reduce the demand on the traditional concrete type of materials, which is putting prices through the roof. Just our government can't think like that. They're just concerned with their own careers, as far as I'm concerned, and everything else is peripheral. Padraig, another story that you wanted to lead with this week was looking at the migrant issue as well. Do you want to just talk about that?
Yeah, so again, there's two stories on this, and I think for balance we need to bring them up as well. So one is basically being brought up by the European Union. So it has urged its member countries to deport more people who enter Europe without authorization and who are not eligible to stay, saying that only around 1 in 5 would-be migrants should be sent home, actually are sent home. Last year, we had a return of only 21% of those who are not eligible to stay. EU Home Affairs Commissioner Ylva Johansson told reporters at the European Parliament in Strasbourg, France. When we fail to return people, this hampers our system and erodes trust. Ms. Johansson said that 340,000 decisions were handed down in EU member nations last year to deport people, but at only 60% of cases did European authorities try to contact migrants' home countries to get them accepted back in. We need migration, but it has to be in a legal and orderly way. To protect the right to apply for asylum, we have to show that we are appropriately dealing with those who do not qualify for international protection, she said. The arrival of well over 1 million migrants in 2015, mostly people fleeing war in Syria or Iraq, sparked one of the EU's biggest political crises. Member countries bickered over who should take responsibility for the migrants, who enter, and whether other members should be obliged to help. The row continues to this day. Repeated attempts to reform the asylum system have been made, but there has been little progress. Unable to resolve the core dispute, the EU has turned to paying the countries that people live, leave, or transit to prevent them setting out in the first place. Ms. Johansson said the EU's border and coast guard agency is well equipped to organise the deportation flights and urged the bloc's 27 member countries to take advantage of them. So what I would remark on in that article is this is coming into the public domain in the same time that there is a social crisis where people are seeing huge numbers of people coming into society. It's entering this information in, which is valid and seems to be accurate information. It's entering it in, and it's going to affect the public discourse, where it's going to embolden both camps, really. Like, so one side is going to see this as anti-migrant, and the other side is going to see it as justification for deportation, you know. So what that does to social cohesion and people's assumptions of people based on where they may not appear to have been born in Ireland worries me. The other side to it then is the second story, Finbar. So There's been no requirement for an increased policing presence in any area due to asylum seekers, the Gardaí has said in a documentary which details the effect of rising immigration movement in Ireland. In the statement, the Garda said that there's been no significant increase in crime statistics as a result of the increase in asylum seekers arriving in Ireland. The Department of Justice has said there is no evidence of a link between the number of asylum seekers in Ireland and an increase in crime. Notwithstanding isolated local incidents, and Garda Síochána has not recorded any significant increase in criminal activity or public order issues directly caused by international protection applicants at this time, said Garda headquarters. So it's important to bring balance into the conversation. Now, the two sources of this may not be the sources of truth for many people, or it may well be for most people. The Irish Times and the Gardaí themselves, the information here is going to be derived from a factual account. So it may not suit people with a certain view to say that there hasn't been a rise in crime, but if this is the facts, this is the facts at this time, and they make pains to say that at this time, and they say notwithstanding local issues. So you will get instances of this somewhere that there is crime being carried out, as you will generally in a population. So I think it's important to highlight these two things that are going into the same space where people are discussing immigration, international protection, refugees, housing, and all the trouble that's bringing into society at the moment.
But I think on the first issue, if I'm going to be absolutely honest, a number of actions were taken by the Irish government over the last couple of years that seriously encouraged and continues to encourage economic migrants to come to this country. The naturalization legislation that was brought in, the advertising in countries right around the world in terms of what you get in Ireland, what you can access as an asylum applicant in Ireland. And something has to happen to quell that. To be honest with you, we're in such a crisis, and we need to apply the rules that we have. If people are coming here, they're abusing an application system, an asylum application system in some way. I believe that we need to have rules. We just can't be open borders. That's just it. In terms of the second matter about the statement from Garda Síochána, I'm always quite dubious when people say that there are no statistics, because you do have to go looking for these statistics yourself. You know what I mean? You can't. You're quite right in saying there's no evidence if you haven't bothered to try to create that evidence or look at it. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't necessarily take them at their word when they say things like that. But on the other hand, I am completely against labeling whole groups of people as criminals, as rapists, as murderers, as thieves. It's just not on. And that's what's happening at the moment and at some of these protests that are not all of them, but at some of these protests that are going on, and some of these videos that have been put out online. That people are, it's horrific. It's lowering people to such a standard that elements within our society and our culture might think it's okay to commit violence against these people that we've lowered in the eyes of humanity. It's just not on. We're not going there in M-Compass Media. We'll call it out every time, as we're doing right now. But at the same time, we do need to have the application of rules around migration and the asylum processes applied, and they're there for common sense reasons. Any take on that, Burke?
Yeah, I think there's common sense in what you're saying there. I think most people would like to see the people that need help getting help. So it's really a case of let's get a system that does that. We want to see people who are fleeing war and oppression. We want to see them helped. Like we're talking there about the 2015 crisis from Iraq and Syria was some of the main places people were coming from. We know what's happening in those countries. We know what's happening in lots of countries. And at the moment, Ukraine people are fleeing areas of Ukraine. They need to flee there because they're war zones. Who's responsible for the war is another matter, but I think we do as a people like to help, and I've watched quite a lot on this. Generally, people qualify their answer to this question in the same way. We want to help the people that need help, and I think that's fair.
But I think we also need to stop. Our governments and our international planners need to stop seeing people as labor to be moved around the world. Oh, we have a crisis over here. sure, what advantage can we take of that? We'll get cheap labor moved in for our aging population. We have to stop viewing people as objects to be used for particular objectives. Every human life is a human life that has the length that it has and has the quality that it has and should be valued and acknowledged for that, in my opinion. We're running short on time, Padraig. The final story that you have is focusing on the legacy of the use of plastic bullets. Do you want to run with that?
Yeah, so there's a new investigation been done by the BBC. So the British Army knew it was too dangerous to fire rubber bullets and plastic bullets at children in the north, but continued to do so. A BBC investigation has found. BBC Spotlight has claimed both the army and police were involved in a cover-up regarding the deaths of children killed by the bullets during the Troubles. BBC Spotlight programme Lethal, The Secret History of Plastic Bullets, reveals how documents showed that the RUC was firing a plastic bullet gun which was never fully cleared for use against people. The gun fired rubber and later plastic bullets. It was invented for the north of Ireland, and at least 120,000 rounds were fired during the Troubles. There's discussed at the discovery that plastic bullet death files are closed for up to 84 years. In one particular case, a boy's killing by army rubber bullet in Belfast 1972 was unjustified, said a coroner, with a total of 16 people killed by rubber or plastic bullets during the Troubles, while a 17th person was killed by a fall, possibly after being hit by a bullet. Stephen Geddes, who was 10, was killed when he was hit by a British Army plastic bullet at Divis Flats in Belfast in 1975. Speaking to BBC's Northern Ireland Spotlight programme, the child's brother, Jim Geddes, said, I remember him being fairly timid, a quiet kid. I'd see him with his little friends, just an unassuming kid. This little guy never got to grow up and get married, have children of his own. Never happened, he said. An inquest into the child's death found he had been out playing at the time of the tragedy and there was no justification for his shooting. Documents uncovered during the inquest revealed that in 1971, the British Army's own land operations manual stated baton rounds should not be used against children, but this instruction was never passed on to soldiers. Padraig O'Murray, the Geddes family solicitor, claimed it proved evidence of a cover-up. So this isn't a huge revelation to people in Ireland that has long known the illegitimate use of these type of weapons, and obviously, like anybody who would have opposed the British Army being in Ireland at all would have had the same opinion that they should never be firing anything in the state. But to think that they were being fired at children and they've killed children, they were never authorised for use. This is coming out now. So although it's no surprise, and although there's a big lapse in time before we're seeing this coming out, it does make you despair of the authorities themselves. Like, so when people are put into positions of power in a society, what they stand over, like this is an outrageous reflection on the British state at the time. There's been many of those type of things, from Bloody Sunday to say Hillsborough and Liverpool, the Liverpool fans of Hillsborough, what happened to them. There's been all these problems with the British in terms of how they seem to look upon certain demographics, I would say, because it seems to be certain people have only ever really suffered in these terms. Certain groups of people, working class people in Ireland and in Britain, have been on the wrong end of these things for too long, and cover-ups, I suppose, is the big commonality there, taking 30 and 40 years to get decisions.
Isn't it what we share with oppressed peoples like the people of Palestine and around the world who've also gone through this? It's something that we, the Irish people, I think, share with those people as well. The fact that this has gone on for so many years, revelations are still coming out, and this behavior is still replicated around the world by so-called Western militaries, whether it's in Iraq, Libya, whether it's in Ukraine today or other countries. It just doesn't seem like it's ever going to stop. And slowly, drip by drip, revelations come out. But as you say, it's always the innocent that suffer. It's always the smaller man, woman, or child that suffers. And the big wigs move on, they retire to their big fancy houses with their big pensions. That's all we have for this week, folks. Thanks for joining us again. Like, share, subscribe on whatever platform that you're watching this on. And give us a share out where you can, because we're fighting the algorithms to try to bring you some more balanced news that you won't get on mainstream media. That's all from me tonight, folks.
That's all from me as well. Thanks very much.